So when we started, people were wondering, well, what is AMD going to be when they grow up? And our driving force at the time was to decide what we could be best at. And I really believed that we could be the best in high performance computing. Back in the day when I would sit with our technical fellows and we would make that big decision of, hey, are we going to bet the company's roadmap on chiplets? And we said, yes.
Lisa, I'm so glad this has worked out. I've been looking forward to this for months.
Well, thank you, Reid. It's great to be here and great to be here with you and Arya.
So you've described yourself as someone who has always liked hardware and building things. So tell us more. Where does this kind of curiosity and drive come from?
Yeah, so Reid, just a little bit of background. So I was born in Taiwan and I immigrated to the United States when I was 3. And so my dad was really into math and science and those kinds of things. And so when I was a kid, I just found it really interesting to understand how things worked. My younger brother had a remote controlled car that would go sort of up and down our hallway, and like one day it stopped working, and I was like, like why would it stop working? And so as a curious kid, you unscrew it and you realize that there's a loose wire, and like if you connect the wire, it starts working again. And that kind of just gave me this feeling of like it's nice to work on things where there's cause and effect, right? Like you do something and all of a sudden you can make something work, or you can do something that sort of is unexpected. And that's kind of what got me into hardware. And when I was a young college student looking for a job, I had a chance to work in a semiconductor lab. And I think the rest is a little bit history.
Well, the next time my kids break their remote control cars, I'm going to be like, if Lisa Su can fix it, just get in there, open it up. And I have a feeling that experience probably led to my next question, which is, I've heard you say that some people said you were crazy to go into chips instead of hardware. So can you take us back to that time and that decision making, and did it feel crazy to you?
Well, so, back to, it seems like, ages and ages ago, when people would say, you are interested in semiconductors, and they would be like, what are semiconductors? Like people didn't really know what semiconductors were. And I would say, hey, I work on chips. And then people would say, what kind of chips? Like, you mean like potato chips? And I'm like, no. I mean semiconductor chips. And so, yeah, look, 30 years ago, now I'm dating myself. People didn't talk about semiconductors. People didn't think about what they were. And for me, I got my bachelor's, master's, and PhD at MIT in electrical engineering. And what was really important is that you work on projects and you work, I had a research thesis and all of that. And so I worked in a semiconductor lab. I built devices. They were like 1 micron devices, which seemed like, eons ago when you were talking about 1 micron. And now, everyone's talking about like, how do we go to 2 nanometer? So a lot has changed in that time frame. But I thought it was amazing that you could build devices on a chip, the size of like a dime or, a quarter, and it could do, things like computing. And that's kind of what got me into semiconductors. And yes, it was a time when semiconductors were not interesting. They were not sexy. Nobody talked about them. But for me, they were kind of interesting because I could see the product of my work actually turn out to make something run like a computer, which, was kind of very exciting for me.
No, absolutely. And I think you're right. It was like the time before chips were cool. And so we're going to get to the present, but from your early days as an engineer to today, can you talk to us about those career chapters?
I would say that when I started, I was an engineer's engineer. So, I was a device physics person. I really enjoyed dressing up in a bunny suit and going into the lab. And, just imagine me in a bunny suit.
I love
going
it.
into the labs. I would do experiments on my chips. I would go and test my chips. It was very, very exciting. I spent a lot of the early part of my career at IBM. And, I think IBM is, just an amazing company. I think, as you've looked at the contours of IBM, and now I'm under Arvind, Krishna, who's doing just a fantastic job. Like you could learn everything at IBM. I went in as a 25-year-old and it was 300,000 people. And you're thinking like, how can little old me make a big difference in a company of that size? But you realize that at the end of the day, the beauty of engineering is it actually matters what you do. It matters less what your title is. It matters less how many years you've been with at the company. It matters more what ideas that you have. And so I had a chance to really work on some exciting projects. At that point in time, I worked on some of the first copper interconnects when we were integrating copper into semiconductor labs. And I kind of grew up at IBM. So I say every 2 years I got to do something different. So I was, first a device physics person, then I became sort of a manager of a product team. And then I started learning something about business and sort of how do you bring products to market. And I think that brings me along to, where I am today, which is, I like to say, doing probably the most fun thing I can imagine doing, which is being at the leading edge of technology in an industry that makes the world a better place.
Today, massive conversations around AI hardware. We tend to hear about two major powerhouses, AMD and NVIDIA. For people who aren't necessarily up to speed on hardware, let's hear direct. What are the ways to kind of understand AMD, what its role in this is, and how it's different than NVIDIA?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Reid, if I can just take a little bit of a detour, AMD is a company with a very rich history. We've been around for 55, 56 years. We've always been in the computing world. And it's always been around pushing the envelope in computing. So if you ask, what do we do when we wake up in the morning? It's about, how do we push the envelope on high performance computing? And it turns out today that high performance computing is all about AI and how we can get, AI infrastructure to a point that, more people can use AI in their businesses and in their daily lives. And so what we do is really all kinds of computing. I like to say billions of people touch AMD hardware every single day. And you touch our hardware in the cloud. So if you're running, any of the basic services, probably on the podcast right now, today, we're running through some AMD hardware in the cloud. Many of the most important, services that we have, whether you're talking about, Teams, or you're talking about Zoom, or you're talking about Instagram, or you're talking about if you call an Uber or any of those things, somehow go through AMD hardware. We're also in things like Sony PlayStation or Microsoft Xbox. Those are also things that are AMD hardware. And what I'd like to say is, our goal is to make sure that we have the right compute at the right time. So, your comment about, what separates hardware companies. We are actually here to provide the entire solution capability, Reid. It's not just about hardware, but it's about how do we accomplish things, whether you're trying to process as much data as possible in the data center, or you're trying to have the best client experiences in a PC or in another device. We have the right computer for the right application. And I think that's very core, to our mission in life.
So I love that you have described AMD's mission as solving the world's most important problems and challenges. And like Reid and I, you are an AI optimist who is excited about it. So if you could have AI help solve just one of the world's most important problems, what would it be, and what do you think the impact could be?
Wow, Aria. Well, first of all, I feel like I'm talking to the experts here. Certainly, Reid being very prolific on this topic. I'm optimistic about AI for many, many things, and I view AI as really a multiplicative factor to what humans can do. Right? I mean, the fact is, humans are amazing. We have made so much progress over this period of time, but now we can use computing to kind of add an X factor. And perhaps, Aria, I could say, look, there's so many things that AI can do for businesses. We're certainly using it throughout AMD for lots and lots of things. We also look at it as what it can do for, personal productivity. But probably the place that I'm most excited about is what AI can do for healthcare and medicine, and for quality of life, right? Because I think about, the things like money can't buy health, but if computing can help improve sort of health outcomes, and, AI is such a big part of that, I think it's just amazing. I mean, it goes back to this notion of, man, we're working in like the most fun industry, on the face of the planet.
We'll get back to AMD because obviously very important part of, like, exactly as you mentioned, the infrastructure of everything that's happened in compute, in the cloud and in many other places. I actually have a couple of Microsoft devices that are powered by AMD. But on the healthcare, I do think this is actually one of the things that people don't quite realize about how much of an implication there would be. Everything from like a medical assistant that's 24/7 available on your smartphone for your kid, your parent, your sibling, your partner, etc., to obviously what I'm doing with Manis AI with Siddhartha Mukherjee, which is how do we create a drug discovery factory using AI to accelerate the cure of cancers? What are some of the things that people should understand as kind of the near and medium term possible futures with healthcare? What are some of the things you're seeing from your perch at the center of this with AMD, and why should people be excited about this?
I think, Reid, it's a great point. I think it's all of the above to some of the examples that you've given, right? So very near term examples. I think AI can actually improve health care outcomes for people like today. And when you think about sort of the diversity of healthcare that exists, even just across this country, whether you're at the best hospital versus you're in some rural community where you don't have the best doctors and you don't have the best capabilities, to be able to equalize some of those healthcare outcomes with the usage of AI. Because if one of the things that I found most interesting about medicine, just kind of spending some time in it, is it's actually more art than it is science, right? Early diagnosis of things like cancers or other things really help improve healthcare outcomes so much. And you can't count on the same quality of service everywhere you go, but being able to use AI as an assistant. The best wording that I had was a conversation I had once with Eric Corbett when he talked about what do you expect of an AI medical assistant? You wouldn't say that you would want your AI capability to make all of the decisions, because we wouldn't trust that capability. But boy, if you had AI just equalize, and let's call it a very very strong capability to give you a second opinion right on the spot. That's just a very easy example right now, to the much further out examples like the one that you talked about, which is drug discovery. I mean, to help take what might take 10 years of experimentation with sort of normal traditional computation, to reduce that to weeks and months, so that we can really accelerate the rate and pace of innovation in this area. I think those are all really interesting outcomes. And perhaps one that I'm personally passionate about is, I've experienced in the healthcare system, you actually see a lot of cases where we have specialists in medicine. But when you think about the human body is not like a set of organs, right? It's not sort of your kidney specialist and your heart specialist and it actually is an integrated system. And to find people who could integrate all those systems is actually pretty hard. And I actually think that that's where AI can help us quite a bit in terms of integrating knowledge across a vast amount of data and a vast amount of experience to give us the best knowledge possible.
And actually, one particular follow-up that I think is really important that everyone pay attention to in your answer is, today already, it's a great second opinion. So if you're countering anything that's serious, you check it as a second opinion. By the way, if the two don't match, then go to a third, right, as a way of doing it. And that's already an amplification for what we have today. And I thought that was a really important thing for people to understand, the AI moment that's already today.
Yes. And the other thing I think we find, Reid and Aria, and you probably experienced this as well, is it's getting better practically on a weekly basis, right? So the AI that you might have experienced 6 months ago will be different than the AI you will experience 6 months from now, because there's this constant learning in process, and that's exactly what we would want for like I said, all of these applications, but particularly in the medical field.
So Lisa, something tells me that you're not a person who yells from the rooftops about your successes, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention, because the turnaround that you have had at AMD is like truly incredible. You went from revenue of $4 billion to more than $23 billion in your time as CEO when you joined in 2014. And you saw shares go from $2 to $200. And so you can't have that amazing turnaround without like making some risky decisions, making some bets, betting the company. Were there times that you thought like, if this bet doesn't pay off, like I'm betting the company here, or I'm taking a risk that's necessary, but is still a big risk in that 10-year trajectory?
Well, 10 years sounds like a long time, Arya, but actually in tech, it's not that long.
Right.
It really is a few product cycles. And look, I've said this before, and I'll say this again. AMD is like a dream job for me. I'm getting to work on the most exciting technology in the industry with amazing people, amazing customers, partners, all of that stuff. And so when we started, yeah, we were probably about $4 billion in revenue. And people were wondering, well, what is AMD going to be when they grow up? And for me, I think the most important thing for us to do was to decide what we wanted to be best at. Because I really do believe for tech companies, the key is you have to be best at something. It is, there's a whole bunch of other things that are important. You need the right balance sheet and you need the right, all of those things. But, our driving force at the time was to decide what we could be best at. And I really believed my CTO, Mark Papermaster, has been my partner on this journey. We believed that we could be the best in high performance computing. And at the time, high performance computing wasn't as exciting as it is today because AI wasn't as big as it is today. And the cloud was, kind of on a different path. And so for high performance computing, CPUs, GPUs, the right compute at the right time, that was what we were going to be best at. And the world was also changing. And, Reid knows this very well, right? Whenever there are technology inflection points, it actually brings opportunities. And so we were in a place where, the world in semiconductors had for 30 years really was driven by Moore's law. And the idea that every 2 years or every 18 months, you could double the productivity. And so it was all about scaling. But scaling was changing. And, we saw that change. And yes, we made a few bets. We made the bet that, scaling would slow down and we had to innovate in different ways. And, perhaps one of the largest innovations is we were the first to really put high performance computing in, sort of breaking it up into what we would call chiplets, such that, you could take advantage of putting lots and lots of chips together to become a higher performance computer. And if you look at, every high performance CPU today, if you look at, future generation, AI GPUs, they're all going to use this technology. But it is always about making bets. And yes, Arya, there were, those meetings back in the day when I would sit with our technical fellows and we would make that big decision of, hey, are we going to bet the company's roadmap on chiplets? And we said, yes. It's trust, but verify, right? We had a lot of learning. I mean, I can say there were products that worked really, really well, and there are products that worked not so well, but we learned a ton from the process of that.
In everything that I've read about you, you seem very patient. You're saying, hey, we have a 3 to 5 year plan. This, to your point, like a decade is nothing. And how do you get everyone else to come on board for that when like there's so much noise and there's fads and we should be going left because our company is going right? Like, how do you get everyone else on board for that longer term vision?
Well, I think, Arya, you have to have conviction. And yeah, there are all kinds of fads. I mean, we see all kinds of fads even in tech, right? When you think about what people went through, like when we started, there was a lot of conversation on, hey, Lisa, AMD should be making smartphone chips. And then when you look at sort of where things have evolved, you actually realize that companies have sort of fundamental DNA in terms of what they're good at. Like we are just really good at building big computers, like that's what we think about every single day. When we've been working on AI for the last 7 or 8 years, I think AI didn't just show up with ChatGPT. AI was around for a long period of time. The industry didn't quite figure out how to make AI accessible enough, and I think that's the difference with large language models. Is it's now quite accessible to a much broader population across a much broader set of applications, and it does require making big long-term bets. I do like to say that the decisions that we're making today, we will know 3 to 5 years from now whether we made the right decisions, and that's okay. That's actually good. Now, the rate and pace of AI though is different, and I'm certainly curious to see how you feel about it, Reid. But certainly in some of the stuff that you've talked about, I think the rate and pace of AI is faster than any other thing that I have seen in my career, because I think it's because you are allowed to experiment much more. Like hardware is on 3-year cycles, software can be on 3-week cycles. And as a result, although we provide infrastructure for this, the tremendous amount of innovation on the application layer and on the usage models, I think is what makes AI quite different and actually quite exciting.